everyone, welcome to today's webinar. Thank you for joining me. For the next 30 minutes approximately, we're going to be exploring how to talk about mental well-being at work. Whether it's our own mental well-being or someone else's, we know that it can be really beneficial to talk about our mental well-being, but also incredibly difficult. So what I'm hoping to share with you is some really practical and helpful ways that you can engage in those courageous, compassionate conversations with more confidence. This webinar is being recorded. If you're watching live and you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the comments box and I'll either try and answer them as we go if I spot them, or if I have enough time at the end, I will answer them then. So my name's Rebecca Smith. I'm a mental wellbeing consultant, supervisor and psychotherapist. I've worked in a variety of industries and settings and have a number of years of clinical experience. I founded the Peachy Mind in 2020. It's a workplace mental wellbeing consultancy where we specialise in mental wellbeing supervision for HR professionals and mental health first aiders and line managers. We also provide consultancy services and online courses. Really, we're focused on bringing that mental health expertise into workplaces and working with them so that they can create mentally healthier working environments. So in today's webinar, we're going to be looking at why we need to talk about mental wellbeing at work. So just really a bit of setting the scene as to the current picture. We all know that we need to talk about our mental wellbeing, but just a little bit of scene setting in terms of what that looks like at the moment. We'll look at why is it so hard, because when we understand why it's so hard, that can help us to move forward and know ways in which to navigate that and to have those more difficult conversations. Then we're going to look at 3 really practical steps in terms of how we set the scene for those conversations. Thinking about who should we talk to, which can be more complicated than you might first think. And what do we actually say and how do we say it? So when we've done that preparation and we're in that situation and we're about to talk about our mental well-being, what do we actually say and how do we say it? So this webinar is focused on how we talk about our own mental well-being at work, but everything that I'm going to share with you is equally applicable to if you want to approach somebody else because you've noticed a change in their mental well-being. And also if you're a line manager or you have people responsibilities, being able to role model how to talk about our mental well-being at work and to increase our resilience and skill in being able to be a compassionate listener and have that depth of understanding as to how difficult it can be for someone to come to us and talk to us about their mental well-being. So let's have a look at the current picture. I'm not going to read each of these statistics out, but it's just a couple I want to highlight. So 55% of respondents in this particular survey who have experienced depression in the past 12 months said work had contributed. However, only 36% of them discussed this with their boss or employer. So even though work was a contributing factor that they identified, very few of them felt confident in discussing it with their boss or employer. Only 38% of employees think that their line managers are confident in having sensitive conversations around mental health. So we know that mental wellbeing and mental health is a huge challenge, particularly at the moment with we're post-COVID. There's lots of things that have happened, lots of changes we've had to navigate. And people are experiencing increased levels of anxiety, depression, stress, burnout. But what I really wanted to highlight here was that there is a distinct gap between the people that are experiencing problems which are exacerbated by work and the people that are able to speak to their bosses or employees about it, and also the amount of people that actually have confidence that their line managers will know how to respond. So what I hope is that this webinar will help to build some confidence in terms of how to have those sensitive conversations, and how, if we are on the receiving end and we're listening to somebody else, we may have a better understanding of what it's taken for them to be able to come forward and talk to us about what they're struggling with. So let's have a look at why is it so difficult. We know it's hard to talk about our mental well-being, and it can be particularly hard to talk about it at work. So let's start by looking at vulnerability and shame. So talking to someone about our mental well-being involves a degree of vulnerability as we're taking a risk. We may also feel ashamed of the difficulties we're experiencing and fear rejection, or that we won't be understood. Now, one of our brain's primary functions is to protect us from physical and emotional harm, which is why we can feel a sense of avoidance, of wanting to put ourselves in situations where we feel we may be more vulnerable, or we may experience rejection or misunderstanding of some sort. Historically, there is a safety in being part of a group and being accepted, and this equally applies to feeling that way in our working environments. So our brains will do things specifically to discourage us from engaging in situations where there is a risk that we will be rejected in some way from that group, or where we'll be misunderstood. It's really a basic survival strategy, because in caveman times, literally we would have been more physically protected from predators by being part of a group. And our brains have evolved in many, many ways, but still there is that primary function of protecting us from emotional and physical harm. So if we perceive that engaging in a conversation about our mental well-being, or our brain perceives that there is going to be increased vulnerability and we may encounter emotional harm in some way, it will actively try and discourage us from engaging in that conversation. So that's just one thing that we need to overcome to be able to begin to talk about our mental well-being at work. Moving on, we all bring our own frames of reference to these conversations. So we all have our own experiences and histories that we will consciously and subconsciously refer to when approaching a difficult situation. And this may well influence the way we think, feel, and behave. So an example of this could be, perhaps in the past we've shared that we were struggling with anxiety with our manager, and our manager was less than understanding, perhaps dismissive, perhaps they promised to make certain adjustments and they didn't. And that may well, as we approach a conversation again, influence the way we think, feel, and behave in this particular situation, because we have a history of experiences which our brains will draw upon. And similarly, it's important to recognise that the person we choose to talk to will also be bringing their own experiences and histories to that conversation. We don't necessarily need to change our frames of reference, but just having that awareness that they could be affecting and influencing the way we engage in that conversation can be really helpful in learning how to make sure they have less of an impact, and that we're really dealing with the here and now based on what is really happening rather than on those past experiences. Now, I want to touch upon courage and compassion in here, because a lack of courage and compassion contributes to why it's so difficult to talk about our mental well-being at work, because courage and compassion really are the antidote to the challenges that we face in talking about mental well-being. This is twofold, really. Developing the courage to talk about our mental well-being is essential, because we create these stories in this internal dialogue of what is likely to happen if we talk. And when we develop the courage to talk and to share, we give ourselves the opportunity of disproving that internal dialogue and proving those stories wrong. If we never develop the courage to talk, then that shame is never removed, and we never have that opportunity to receive a kind, helpful response from somebody else. We instead stay stuck in those circles and cycles of internal dialogue that discourages us. Compassion is important because it helps us to build resilience when we practice self-compassion. So when we know we have the resources within ourselves to soothe ourselves and to help ourselves feel better if a conversation around our mental well-being is difficult, that helps us to have the confidence and the courage to be able to engage in that conversation in the first place, because we know that we have the internal resources to be able to show ourselves kindness and understanding and reassurance, however that conversation may go. So really, to summarise, talking about our mental wellbeing at work is so difficult because we have to overcome these things. We have to find a way to not necessarily embrace the vulnerability that comes with being open and honest, but to be able to sit with it, navigate it, and have the courage and compassion to be able to work through it and to still be able to have those conversations, recognizing that our brains are trying to protect us from emotional harm, but it actually isn't helpful because it denies us the opportunity of someone else showing us that understanding and helping us to navigate the difficulties we're experiencing. So we've had a look at why it's so difficult. So now we're going to look at how we can navigate some of those difficulties. So one way we can reduce some of those feelings of vulnerability and perhaps helplessness is to look at, well, what are we in control of? What do we have power over in this situation? And one of the things is we can set the scene. We can think about how we're going to prepare for that conversation in a way that will help us to feel more comfortable. So we can consider what day of the week might be better for us and what time of day is best. So if you're feeling particularly anxious about this conversation, for some people, they would prefer to almost get it over and done with earlier in the day and at the start of the week. So a Monday morning, for example, and then there might be a sense of relief that that conversation is over and they can move forward from there. For other people, they may feel, actually, I want to have that conversation on a Friday afternoon because then I can walk away, have the weekend, reflect, not have to see anybody until Monday morning. So it's really thinking about what is going to be best for you, what is going to make you feel more comfortable, less vulnerable, more confident. Think about, would you like to have a face-to-face or online conversation? Obviously, this may depend upon your working environment and structure, but some people definitely feel more comfortable in a face-to-face situation where you can see the other person's body language. There maybe is slightly more intimacy in the sense that there is a very immediate response, whether it be verbal or non-verbal, when you're in the room with somebody. Other people find that the distance provided by talking online gives them more confidence than being in a room with somebody. That distance actually can provide a sense of reassurance, and they may feel more comfortable in their own surroundings to be able to have that conversation. If you decide that you prefer a face-to-face conversation, is there a particular venue or location you would feel more comfortable? Lots of people actually feel more comfortable outdoors, walking and talking. So this may be something that you'd like to consider. Also think about, when will you not be interrupted? If you know the person that you want to have this conversation with is going to be in demand at particular times of day, it's really important to engage in this conversation at a different time of day, or to make sure that they have made provisions and have booked this time specifically for you where you'll be free from interruptions. And finally, think about how much time do you estimate you will need. You know yourself best. You know the difficulties you're experiencing, and it's always better to have too much time than not enough. You can always leave the meeting or the situation early, but it can be much more difficult to extend it. And it's really hard to predict sometimes how you will feel in that situation. You may find that once you start talking, that it really flows, and then once you've got over that initial hurdle of beginning to talk about it, there's a lot of things that you want to share in one go. Equally, you may find that you want to share things in smaller chunks, and then it's a little bit overwhelming. Maybe it's emotional, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with finding it overwhelming or emotional, but knowing that you're under a time constraint can be difficult. So it's much easier to be able to leave that situation early than it is to need more time. So just to summarize, really, preparation can help you to feel more comfortable, can help you to feel more confident. Just those really practical steps in terms of considering what is going to be best for you and setting the scene for that difficult conversation in a way that helps you to feel more in control, less vulnerable, and more confident in what it is that you need to share. So you've set the scene, you've thought about what day of the week, what time, where you want to have that conversation, how much time you're going to need. So now we're going to have a look at who should you talk to. Now, I've tried to upload this slide various times, and the layout still, for some reason, is not quite right. So I hope that you can see it okay, and I will take you through it. The Braving Framework was developed by Brené Brown, and it's really a sort of a list of bullet points or guidance notes to think about if you're going to share some vulnerable information, questions to ask yourself first when you're considering who you should talk to. Because there may be people within your organisation that you feel more comfortable with in some instances and talking about some things, but when you ask yourself these questions, it may be that you discover actually they're not the right person to be talking to about my mental well-being. And also it might open up doors in terms of people you hadn't considered before. So let's have a look. So B stands for boundaries. So thinking about the person or people you're considering talking to, have they respected your boundaries in the past? So if you start talking, are they going to be respectful of where your boundaries lie in terms of perhaps what you're willing to share or what outcome you're hoping for? And another thing to look at is, how do they demonstrate boundaries? Are they willing to put boundaries in place when they need to? Do they have that real understanding of the importance of boundaries? And then R, reliability. This links in, I think, with dependability. Does this person do what they say they're going to do? Can I rely on them to listen well if I choose to share this information with them? And also, can I rely on them to do what they say they're going to do? So if we have this conversation and we agree some outcomes, can I depend on them to do what they say they're going to do? Or are they someone that will say one thing sometimes and do another? A, accountability. Does this person own their mistakes? So if I open up to this person and talk to them about my mental well-being, and they maybe get something wrong, or they maybe promise me something they can't deliver, will they own up to that? Will they try and hide it? Or will they be accountable and say, yes, I've made a mistake? V, vault. Does this person hold in confidence information that is not theirs to share? Similarly, this really links to trust. Can I trust this person? If I share this information with them, can I trust that they are not going to share it with others? Does this person gossip? Has this person shared with me maybe confidential information before about somebody else? Because that can be a huge red flag that what you share with them may not stay with them. There may be things that you agree can be shared, and then again, going back to boundaries, there may well be boundaries to what you're happy to be shared externally outside of that conversation. So you want to know that you can trust that person to hold in confidence particular information and to share other information if it's agreed. Integrity. Will this person be willing to engage in an potentially uncomfortable conversation with me? Will they be willing to perhaps sit with that discomfort and listen? Or are they likely to want to shut it down or to make light of it or to move on in some way? Just looking at that basic thing of, will they be looking at how they've engaged with other people, will they be willing to engage in an uncomfortable conversation potentially? And non-judgment. Does this person listen to others without expressing judgment? So when you think about conversations you've observed them having with others, are they generally judgmental or non-judgmental? Can you trust that if you disclose what you're struggling with, that you will not receive judgment, but they will be open-minded and non-judgmental? And G, generosity. Does this person extend a generous interpretation to the words of others? And looking at this in the context of us talking about our mental well-being, what this really means is, can I trust them to see the best in what I'm sharing with them? And this isn't about looking at it through rose-tinted glasses or glossing over what might be a serious situation. It's, would they perhaps look at the fact of the things that you may already have tried, or the fact that it's positive that you're engaging and opening up? So generally, do they extend a generous interpretation to the words of others? So if anybody wants me to email them this framework, please do let me know. I'd be happy to, because I appreciate it isn't very clear on this particular side. But I do think it provides some really good questions to ask yourself when you're considering who you should talk to at work about your mental well-being. And similarly, I think they provide really good points for reflection if you're in a position at work where you would like people to be able to talk to you about their mental well-being, because you can really look at, do I own my mistakes? Do I say what I'm going to do? Do I put boundaries in place? So are you role modeling all of those things within that framework, which will help to make you someone that other people will want to share their difficulties with? So we've looked at how to prepare in a practical sense. We've thought about who you're going to talk to. So now we're going to look at, well, what do we actually say in these conversations? We've put all that groundwork in place, but what do we say? So start by considering what is important to you. When you approach this conversation, do you want a solution? Do you want advice or signposting? Do you want someone just to listen and really hear what it is that you're saying? Because there can be value in just sharing and feeling heard. It's important that we consider what's important to us, because this really can provide courage as we engage in these conversations. Because when those difficult feelings come up, we can lean into, well, what is most important to me right now? What do I want from this conversation? Almost, why am I engaging in it? Why am I going to sit with these feelings of vulnerability and potentially shame and anxiety? So looking at, well, what is important to me? What am I hoping to gain from this? Can help us to navigate those difficult feelings. Compassion, as I've referred to before, can be really helpful because it helps us to feel safer and more secure, and helps to build that resilience when we're saying difficult things. And it really starts with self-compassion. So as you're having this conversation about your mental well-being, treat yourself with kindness and understanding. You can become a friend to yourself. So when you're perhaps thinking in advance what you want to say, or when you're there, really coach yourself with that internal dialogue of a friend or another kind voice that you may have experienced. It will help encourage you. You can't bully yourself into saying particular things. it is much better to use compassion as a tool to encourage and support yourself in having these difficult conversations. A second part of self-compassion is humanity, or common humanity. So that means that we consider the fact that all human beings, unfortunately, will experience mental health issues. Whilst there can be differences, when we focus on the commonalities and the fact that the person we're sharing with will also have had their own struggles and challenges, it can help us to feel calmer and more connected and increase the chances of us feeling that we will be understood. And the final part of self-compassion is paying attention. And this is linked closely to mindfulness, but what it really means is when you're thinking about what to say in that situation, focusing on that conversation and on the here and now. So just to refer back to an earlier slide where I touched upon our frames of reference and the histories and experiences we might be bringing to this conversation, a key part of compassion is paying attention to the actual experience of that actual conversation in the moments in which it is happening, and trying to keep really our mind on track and online with what is happening in the here and now, even if it's difficult, even if it's uncomfortable. We can do that when we use compassion, because we can soothe ourselves and reassure ourselves as we sit in that difficult situation. So be clear on what your responsibilities are and what can be changed. So it can be helpful when we talk about our mental wellbeing at work to be clear on what we've already taken responsibility for and what we feel can be changed. It can be empowering and positive to be able to say, these are the steps I've already taken. When we're actually talking, starting sentences with I rather than you is really positive, because it removes blame and encourages positive dialogue. When we start sentences with you, so you need to do this, or you make me feel this way, it really can give a sense of blaming the other person. And what that does is it makes them less receptive to what we have to say. When we take ownership of our side of the conversation, how we're feeling, what I would like, how I feel, it encourages a much more positive response, because we are taking ownership and we are not blaming the other person. We're encouraging a positive conversation where both parties take responsibility for their contributions. It's important when you're having this conversation to think about your internal reactions. So just have that awareness of what is happening inside. It may be that certain historical experiences are triggered. It may be that you notice really physical reactions, and just acknowledge them, and to just check in that they aren't influencing the way in which you're engaging in the conversation and the things that you're saying. And finally, I want to touch upon something called stalling, which I think can be really, really important. So take time to think before responding. Take time to think before speaking. We can put a lot of pressure on ourselves that when we start to talk about our mental well-being, we need to have all the answers to any questions that may come, that we need to share everything in one go. But it is okay to take some time. You don't have to have it all figured out before you have that conversation. It is okay to stall. It's okay to say, this is really important to me. I need to take some time to think, and then I'm going to come back to you. And that can either be within the conversation and just taking a couple of minutes, or it can be, I want to take some time. Can we agree to meet at another time and date? Because this is really important to me and to my mental well-being. And I'm just going to take some time to think about my next steps. So remove any sense of pressure that you have to deal with it all in one conversation. So just as a final recap, you've put that preparation in place, you've set the scene, you've decided who you're going to speak to. Think about what you're going to say in terms of what is important to you to help you navigate the difficulties in talking about your mental wellbeing at work. Think about being a friend to yourself as you engage in that conversation. and what historical things you might be bringing to it. So really try and stay focused on what is happening in the here and now in that conversation. And don't be afraid to take your time. You don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to share everything all in one conversation. It is okay to say, I need to take some time. I want to think about this. This is important to me. And I will come back to you with a response. So I hope that all of that has been helpful and provided you with some structure around how to engage in these conversations, and also maybe an understanding of the difficulties other people may face in talking about their mental well-being at work. And also a bit of an understanding of why it is so important at the moment that we try and close that gap between the people that are struggling and the people that are sharing that information. Because as we all know, early support and intervention is absolutely key. The sooner we start to talk if we're struggling, the easier it is to navigate our way to a positive outcome. So that just leaves me to say thank you very much for joining me for the last half an hour. I hope that you found it useful and helpful. You're more than welcome to subscribe to my YouTube channel if you'd like to see more of these sort of videos. And I'm always open to suggestions for future webinars. So thank you again for joining me today.